He was born in silence, not in a grand hospital room, but in a dim, rented apartment on the outskirts of a city that never cared to remember his name. His mother, once a waitress with dreams as delicate as the lace on her worn-out dress, had fallen for a man she thought would save her. That man was Alexander Halvorsen, a towering figure of industry, wealth, and charisma. But above all, he was a coward in disguise. Alexander had wealth that dripped from every corner of his life. Pentoses in Manhattan, private jets named after Greek gods, a fortune that multiplied while he slept. Yet when the woman he had seduced came to him months later, trembling, belly-hugged, eyes pleading not for money, but for acknowledgement, he turned away. This never happened, he said, and with a wave of his hand, erased them both from his story. She didn't beg, she didn't scream, she only nodded and walked away. But she walked away with a child growing inside her, a boy who would carry a name he was never allowed to speak. That boy was named Julien. From the moment he was born, the world conspired to teach him that he was unwanted. Julien grew up, knowing hunger not just as a physical ache, but as a constant companion. His mother worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. She never spoke of his father, but he found out she anyway overheard whispers from neighbors, an old envelope with Alexander's initials, a photo hidden in a showbox. He memorized that face, not H of longing, but H of necessity. When Julien was 7, his mother collapsed while cleaning our hotel hallway. The cause was simple, exhaustion mixed with untreated pneumonia. She died in a sterile hospital room with fluorescent lights flickering above her and one by her side. Julien was moved till the state system an endless parade of orphanages, foster homes, in cold stares. Still, his father did nothing. The man who once whispered promises into his mother as he now catch ribbons at charity galas, donated to orphanages he wouldn't dar step for them, he funded shelters while pretending not to recognize the boy who lived in one of them. Julien never forgot. Each year that passed etched a new scar into his soul. Not always physical, though there were plenty of those, but emotional, spiritual. He watched as other children were adopted, watched as teenagers left the system and vanished into gutters. He became quiet, observant, calculating. He learned how to move through the world unseen. In that invisibility, he built a fortress of his own. He knew who he was. He knew whose blood ran through his veins. And he hated each. But he also understood something else. Power does not beg. It does not ask for love. It does not kneel. It returns on its own terms. So he waited. And while he waited, he listened. Till every mention of Halvorsen Enterprises in the news, till every whisper of mergers, scandals, investments, his hatred became a compass, his silence, a weapon, his hunger, a vow. Julien wasn't the type of child to cry in corners. He was the kind who watched the wolves from the shadows and learned how they move so that one day, he could wear their skin. Julien's adolescence wasn't marked by birthdays or teenage rebellions. It was carved out by silence, grit, and cold decisions. While boys his age discovered loving freedom, he discovered how to survive on $2 a day, how to sleep with one eye open in city shelters where danger were men faces. By the time he turned 13, the boy who once cried quietly for his mother had disappeared. In his place stood someone else, lean, sharp-eyed, silent. He stopped waiting for kindness and started studying the world that had ignored him, especially the world that belonged to his father. Alexander Halvorsen's face seemed to haunt every screen, opening new skyscrapers in Dubai, toasting glasses, at black tie events in Geneva, headlines praising his legacy, his vision, his heart. But Julien had seen his heart. Each had a hole the size of a child's grave. Each time Halvorsen's name appeared, Julien clipped the article, memorized the speech, studied the empire. He started building a map not just of companies and investments, but of betrayal, of patterns, of vulnerability. He didn't want revenge. Not yet. First, he needed something stronger than vengeance. He needed worth. At 15, he lied about his age to get a night job cleaning offices. During the day, he went to school. At night, he scrubbed toilets in buildings funded by his father's associates. Sometimes, he deposed in the dark corridors and stared at the portraits of executives framed in gold. They smiled though at him, oblivious. Till the boy wiping their floors, he made a promise then. One day you will know my name, and it will not come as a request. It will come as a reckoning. Julien devoured books in second-hand libraries, not novels, but economics, business law, biographies of titans who clawed their way up from nothing. He learned the language of money not from tutors, but from Latin night podcasts in free lectures at community centers. He watched documentaries about corporate wars the way others watch sports. He became obsessed, not just with wealth, but with understanding the system that had thrown him age. If the world worshipped money, he would learn how to speak its tongue. By 16, he taught himself how to trade using simulated platforms. He won, lost, adapted, he won again. He took odd jobs fixing laptops, selling vintage clothes, reselling scrap metal. Every cent he owned was reinvested. He never bought clothes, only suits from thrift stores he tailored himself. He never dated, never drank. Distractions were for people who had the luxury of being loved. Meanwhile, Alexander Halvorsen unveiled Halvorsen Tower, the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere. Each was hailed as a monument to visioning legacy. Julien watched the ceremony from a shelter S television. He didn't blink once. He whispered, "Monuments can fall." At 18, Julien was legally an adult, but there was no celebration. He moved into a shared apartment with 4 other men, worked 2 jobs, and enrolled in a community college for finance. There, he began to stand out not because he was loud, but because he was precise. Professors noticed. One in particular, a visiting economist, saw something unusual in Julien, a hunger that was not just ambition. It was destiny denied. "Where are you from?" the professor once asked. Julien smiled coldly. "Nowhere you've heard of." But the man saw through the vagueness. He took Julien under his wing, introduced him to a private network of investors, mentors, old money, new blood, people who whispered names behind closed doors. Julien never asked for help. He offered insight, value, silence. He became trusted. He kept one truth hidden, the name Halvorsen. He adopted a new surname, a neutral one, built a new identity. He wasn't the boy left behind anymore. He was a strategist, a learner, a storm in disguise. By 19, he had joined a silent circle of underground entrepreneurs who called themselves the Fourth Table. They played with millions not in public markets, but in real estate swaps, crypto stakes, early tech disruptions. Julien was their youngest member. No one asked how he got there. They just respected how he moved. And through all of it, he waited for the perfect moment. Not to take his father's money, but to take everything he stood for, brick by brick, handshake by handshake, until the empire of lies Alexander Halvorsen had built would crumble at the feet of the sun. He tried to erase. Julien's rise was not meteoric. It was surgical. While others raced to be seen, he mastered the art of invisibility. He understood only that the richest men in the world weren't the ones paraded on magazine covers. They were the ones who moved their hands behind the clock, making Timmy work for them. By the age of 20, Julien had become a ghost in the world of capital. He operated through layer shell companies, silent partners, frontmen. His portfolio grew not through luck, but through precision. Undervalued assets, bankrupt firms ready for rebirth, and forgotten buildings in neighborhoods on the verge of rebirth. He was not gambling, he was orchestrating. But even the most calculated mind needs a trigger. His came from an unlikely source. One cold autumn night, Julien was attending a discreet investor dinner in Boston, a gathering only accessible through invitation codes sent via encrypted aplicativos. It wasn't meant for newcomers. But Julien had hacked the list months prior and inserted his own alias. The room was filled with men and women twice his age. Old money, legacy, the air thick with secrets and quiet rivalries. That's where he met Elias Rourke. Elias was a myth, an old investor with eyes like a cracked stone and a reputation for making and breaking empires from the shadows. He was said to have mentored titans, ruined dynasties, and seen markets collapse without flinching. He noticed Julien the way predators notice another predator. Their conversation was short, but surgical. "You move like someone who is chasing a ghost," Elias said, swallowing his drink. Julien didn't smile. "Me chasing silence. And when I catch it, ele let it scream." Rourke didn't laugh. He leaned in and whispered, "Come see me tomorrow." Brain 1. That meeting marked the beginning of Julien's most dangerous transformation. Elias took him under his wing, not as a son, not even as a protégé but as a mirror. He saw in Julian something most men feared, the ability to wait, to bleed in silence, and to strike without hesitation. Under Elias' guidance, Julian refined his edge. He learned how wealth was not about possession, but control. How the true game was não ter estoques ou real estate e suas debt. Influence. Leverage. They spent nights diagramming financial structures built to collapse quietly paper castles, worth billions that could be turned to ash without whispering the right ear. They talked about how powerful men built offshore lifeboats while pretending to row with the common man. And most importantly, Juliet learned how legacy could be poisoned from the inside. It was during one of those nights that Elias asked the question Julian had waited years to be asked. Who are you really after? Julian did not hesitate. Alexander Halvorsen. The room went still. Elias knew the name. Everyone did, but few dared speak it in contexts like this. The man was considered untouchable, his empire a fortress built on 30 years of flawless transactions in political immunity. But Elias only nodded. Then we really need more than a plan. We really need patience. A mask so perfect he want to know each SU, until the floor disappears beneath him. Together, they created a strategy that would take years to execute. It was not about revenge. It was about Erazzurri. Juliet would build a firm anonymous, sharp, and hungry. It would present itself as the future, ethical, innovative, impossible, to ignore. Its mission would be disruptive, its branding clean, its roots hidden. And slowly, it would infiltrate the same markets Alexander dominated: real estate, energy, tech. Not to compete, but to corner. Every move Halvorsen Enterprises made would be anticipated, intercepted, and twisted. Julian Odin just beat his father in the market. He would make him obsolete. The hardest part was not raising capital. It was staying invisible, but Juliet thrived in shadows. He made enemies without them knowing his name. Built alliances that did not even realize. They were part of our war. And all the while, Elias watched with a mix of awe and foreboding. You know what happens when a ghost starts haunting the Levi? Elias warned once. They scream, Julia answered. And then they fall. At 23, Julia S. From under a crafted identity and managed by a trusted frontman was invited to a global investment summit. The invitation came with gold accents and embossed lettering, the kind only sent to visionaries. He stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside, among the list of keynote speakers, was the name he'd waited over a decade to confront: Alexander Halvorsen, Chairman Halvorsen Global Holding. Julian Dignité smiled. He folded the letter, placed it on his desk, and whispered, "I am coming home. But this time, not as a beggar, as a storm." The city glowed with wealth that night. Manhattan's skyline was a shrine to men who thought themselves gods, and none more so than Alexander Halvorsen. The grand ballroom of the Veritas Tower, his latest marvel, shimmered under a cascade of chandeliers as the world's most powerful investors gathered for the summit of global holdings. Each was an event of exclusivity, every attendee handpicked, every detail curated. Champagne flowed like rivers. Deals worth billions were being whispered in corners over canapés. At the center of it all stood Alexander Oldonau, with silver in his hair, but no less imposing. Cameras followed him like shadows. The press hung on his every nod. He was at his peak, unshakable, untouchable, until the doors opened. In silence walked he. No one recognized the young man who entered. No entourage, no flash, just a sharp black suit, a calm demeanor, eyes that burned with something no one could name. He moved like he owned the floor, yet carried himself like he needed nothing from each. Some guests noticed him and whispered. Others dismissed him, another startup kid looking for attention. Then came the moment. During the keynote session, right after Alexander's rousing speech about legacy and global resilience, the moderator introduced a disruptive young mind. From a rising firm hailed as the ghost player of the new economy. The name echoed across the room. Julian Vale. Alexander Dignité flinched, not outwardly, but something inside him froze. He stared at the young man walking toward the stage. Something familiar in his posture, in his silence, the sharpness, the stillness. Julian took the podium without a smile. The room quieted. He scanned the audience like a predator who already knew the ending. Good evening, he began, voice calm, precise. Tonight, I want to talk about innovation. I want to dazzle you with numbers. I came here to remind you that the futuro doesn't belong till the loudest, it belongs till the most forgotten. A pause. My company doesn't chase headlines. We chase patterns of power, negligence, and decay. We identify what you want to. We invest where you hit too arrogant to look. We build, not monuments, but weapons. A ripple ran through the room. Julia's tone never shifted. His eyes, however, landed on one man, Alexander. For a brief moment, the air grew thick. A second stretched into eternity. The father stared at the son but saw no recognition, no plea, no pain, just certainty. Then Julien dropped the match. We identified a series of transactions within long-standing legacy firms, patterns suggesting systemic fraud, asset concealment, and environmental deception. These findings will be made public by week end. Gasps, eyes darted. Julien continued. Some of you are complicit, some are merely ignorant. But ignorance wants to protect you from impact. He stepped though. The room was no longer a summit. It was a funeral. Alexander stood motionless, his face pallid, his mind racing. He hadn't seen the boy in decades, had never truly looked at him. And now that face so familiar, so unforgiving, had returned not with outstretched hands, but with fire. Security whispered to Alexander. Advisors swarmed, but he waved them off. Who is he? Someone asked. Alexander's voice was low. A mistake. But the truth was louder in his head. He asked the reckoning I buried. Julien didn't stay for the after party. He walked out into the night alone. He didn't need applause. The seed had been planted. By morning, the world would know his name. The man who had denied him birth would soon feel the weight of his return. The silence after Julia's speech was louder than any applause. It lingered like smoke, thick, invasive, unforgettable, as the guests filtered out of the ballroom, murmuring and speculating. Alexander Halvorsen remained still, eyes fixed on the empty stage where his ghost had just stood. He barely slept that night. By morning, the storm had already begun. International headlines blazed with a new phrase: the rejected son returns. Anonymous leaks had made their way to every major outlet, each loaded with evidence, not accusations, but facts, bank records, offshore accounts, internal memos, contracts buried deep in the archives of Halvorsen Global Holdings, all exposing decades of questionable dealings, environmental violations hidden behind greenwashing campaigns, bribes to foreign officials, financial manipulation that propped up stock values at the cost of small investors in third-world economies. Julien had timed it perfectly. A coordinated media bleaches, simultaneous document drops to regulatory agencies in 5 countries, interviews with former Halvorsen employees who had signed an NDAs but were now protected under whistleblower laws. Every piece fit, every domino fell. At the center of it all, not a vengeful child but a composed, articulate executive from a firm the media began calling the Clean Hand. Julien never confirmed his identity. He never had to. The media did it for him. Images of him at the summit were spliced side by side with old photos of Alexander in his early days. The resemblance was undeniable. Journalists hunted those Julia's orphanage records, found former teachers, shelter coordinators, even old foster parents who remembered the silent boy with the eyes that never blinked. Public sympathy shifted like a tide. He left his own son to starve. He built an empire while ignoring a child who had nothing. Now the child returns not to ask, but to dismantle. The internet devoured it. Social media boiled over. Hashtags trended globally. Halvorsen son returns. Imperial fascists. Inside Halvorsen Global, chaos reigned. The boardroom once lined with marbling confidence now hiked of desperation. Emergency meetings. Lawyers flown from 3 continents. Damage control teams working 24/7. But nothing could contain the leak. Julien had made sure of that. In one particularly damning revelation, a voice recording played across international news. It featured Alexander himself, from over a decade ago, speaking to his legal team. Make sure she doesn't come back. If the child exists, he is not mine. Handle it quietly. The voice was cold, calculated, and unmistakable. It wasn't just a corporate scandal anymore. It was a human betrayal. Protests began outside Halvorsen headquarters. Investors pulled out. Stocks plummeted. While Alexander scrambled to issue statements, apologies, denials, nothing landed. Every word he spoke felt hollow, rehearsed, because the world had already chosen its narrative. A man who erased his own blood. A son who came back, not for revenge but for justice. Julien never appeared on camera, never gave interviews. His firm issued only one statement: we do not seek destruction, we seek truth. If the truth brings collapse, it was never strong to begin with. Inside Alexander's home once a palace of pride, portraits were taken though photos hidden. Even his own wife, long accustomed to his secrets, looked at him differently now. Their daughters, silent at dinners, watched him with guarded eyes. The legacy he had spent decades sculpting was now cracking, not from outside attack, but from within. In Julien, he watched it all unfold from a distance. No celebration, no toast, just quiet observation, because this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of an undoing long overdue. The world now knew his name, but not his story. That remained buried in alleyways, shelters, cracked floors of orphanages. In the silence between each day he survived, Julien had built an empire of vengeance on facts, strategy, and calculation. But beneath each all, pain was the architect. And now, the world would hear it. It started with a request. A global media network invited him for an interview. He declined at first. For weeks, he ignored every invitation, every call. He hadn't done any of this to be seen. He had done it to be remembered by the one who had forgotten. But one morning, Julien stood before a mirror. He saw not the man the headlines were worshipping, but the boy he had been. Starving, dirty, alone. That boy had no voice. It was time to give him one. He agreed to one interview. Just one. It wasn't the broadcast live. It was recorded in a quiet studio, no audience, no bright lights. Just a chair, a camera, the truth. The interviewer began softly. Mr. Vale, many people are calling you a hero, a symbol, a reckoning. But we want to understand. Not the foam, not the scandal. You. Why now? Why him? Julien didn't blink. He stared straight ahead. I steady. For years, I thought hunger was the worst thing they ever feel. He began. But hunger goes away. You steal food. You lie. You survive. But the shame eats differently. Quietly. Slowly. It teaches you not to speak. To believe you deserve silence. He paused. There was a night, he continued, voice lower now. I was 11. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. The shelter had been closed for a holiday. I tried to steal bread from a street vendor. Got caught. He hit me hard. Broke my nose. The interviewer stayed silent. I remember sitting in an alley that night, holding my face, bleeding cold. I looked up at a billboard, a giant image of Alexander Halvorsen, shaking hands with a president. The word said, building a better tomorrow. Julia's jaw tightened. I realized that man was building towers while his son was sleeping beside rats. The room was still. The interviewer barely breathed. People asked me if I am angry. I am not, Julien said. Anger is for the weak. I am something else. I am what happens when pain finds purpose. The clips of the interview went viral within hours of release. But one line, just one thought, through the internet like a wildfire. He images millions forgetting me. Now Yeli make him remember. It became a banner, a mantra, a war cry. Across news platforms, it echoed in articles, tweets, TikToks, in podcasts. It wasn't just a quote. It was a reckoning turned into scripture. But not everyone cheered. In a private meeting at Halvorsen Global, Alexander watched the interview. Alone. He didn't speak. Didn't cry, but when the final line played, he flinched, because no headline had ever spoken to him like that. No stock crash ever pierced his chest like those words. He remembered the boy's mother, remembered the visit she made, her hands trembling, her voice fragile. He remembered telling his lawyers, make her go away. He thought Jimmy would bury it. He thought silence would protect him, but silence had grown teeth. Elsewhere, Julien walked the same streets he once begged on, now lined with luxury. He could afford 1,000 chimes over. He watched children with mothers, families holding hands, The sight no longer hurt. It only reminded him of what was stolen, and what could never be bought back. He funded new shelters anonymously, built programs for foster kids to learn finance, coding, strategy tools of survival. He once clawed foot in the dark. He never put his name on any plaque, because this wasn't about fame, it was about voice. And now, pain had won. In the weeks following Julia's interview, the financial world underwent a quiet earthquake. Markets adjusted, investors redirected. Names that once commanded loyalty were now spoken with caution, even fear. Iñaki Desenteravich, the once mighty Halvorsen name began to fracture. Shares in Halvorsen Global dropped by 47% within a single quarter. Long-standing partners withdrew. A multinational lawsuit loomed. The board of directors, in a final desperate move, voted to remove Alexander from his own company. He didn't fight it. For the first time in decades, he went silent. Alone in his penthouse, Alexander Halvorsen wandered the echoing house of his empire, once adorned with portraits, accolades, newspaper clippings, now bare, dust settled where ambition once roared. He hadn't spoken to anyone in days, not even his daughters, not even his wife, who had left quietly one morning, offering no explanation. He would have reached out to Julia, but pride had always been his compass. And now that compass had led him straight into a desert of regret. Meanwhile, Julia didn't pause. He channeled the media storm, the public attention, the sympathy in the awe. He redirected each into something no one expected. A foundation. The Valley Initiative. Its mission, to support abandoned children, especially those lost in broken systems. It funded education, housing, mental health services. It opened offices in many cities within 6 months. When asked why he was investing in children the world had forgotten, Julia's only response was, "Because I was one of them." He refused to allow interviews inside the foundation. He rarely appeared at its events. He didn't want applause. He wanted momentum. At the World Equity Forum in Berlin, Julia received the Humanitarian Award for Economic Restoration through Social Infrastructure. He gave no acceptance speech, only nodded, but the standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. Behind the scenes, governments consulted him, tech firms partnered with him, billionaires sought him out. He became what his father never expected, not just a name but a force. And yet, one thing never changed. He never once reached out to Alexander, not when the company collapsed, not when the lawsuits began, not even when news surfaced that the former titan of finance had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. The press speculated wildly. Would the son visit? Would he forgive? But Julien never responded. He had erased Alexander not out of spite but out of necessity. Till him, legacy wasn't a name carved into marble. It was the echo left behind when the man was gone. And Alexander's echo had already faded. One winter evening, a reporter followed Julia as he left a community center in Detroit. Snow fell lightly as Julia walked alone, coat tight against the wind. "Do you believe in forgiveness?" the reporter asked suddenly, breathless. Julien stopped, turned. His face, calm as ever, revealed nothing. "I believe in memory," he said. "Em some memórias. Are warnings." Then he disappeared into the snowfall. That night, Alexander sat alone in his penthouse, watching the clips on his phone. No tears, just stillness. He realized then that the legacy he built had not been stolen. It had been corrected by the very child he tried to erase. The office of the Valley Initiative was quiet when the envelope arrived. No courier, no announcement, just a simple letter left at the reception desk, cream-colored paper, sealed with wax, no return address. It was handed to Julien that same afternoon during a routine meeting. He turned it over once, twice, recognizing the handwriting instantly. He didn't open it right away. He waited. That evening, after the sun had dipped behind the skyline, Julien sat alone in his office. The city outside pulsed with light and ambition, but inside, it was only stillness. He placed the envelope on his desk, stared at it. The seal was faintly smudged. The paper bore a scent of old cologne, faint, familiar. He broke the seal. The letter was handwritten, unsteady, as if from a man no longer in full command of his strength. And yet, each word carried the weight of a past too long silenced. "Julien, I don't know how to begin this, and perhaps I never will. I don't know if these words will reach you or if you will care to read them, but I have spent the final months of my life realizing what I refused to see for decades. I wronged your mother. I wronged you. I built a kingdom while burying my blood beneath its foundation. And now, the kingdom is rubble, deservedly so. I once believed power would protect me from consequence. But the truth is, it only delayed. You brought the truth to me, not with anger, not with violence, but with precision, with silence, with brilliance. You are the everything I am not. Marty. If I have one regret, only one, each is that I never held you, never heard your voice as a child, never saw you become the man the world now respects. This letter is not a plea for redemption. I have no right to ask. Each is merely the only thing I can give you now, the truth. You were never forgotten. You were buried under my shame. And for that, I am sorry. Alexander. Julia read the letter once, slowly, every line, every crack in the handwriting, every ghost behind the ink. Then, he folded each, placed it gently into a steel tray on his desk, and lit a match. The paper cold, blackened, disappeared into ashes. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He simply stood, walked to the window. He looked out at the city he now helped shape. Forgiveness was never promised. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. Some legacies are redrawn not with reunions, but with resolve. The next morning, a press release announced a new initiative by Julia S. Foundation funding for children of incarcerated parents. No mention of Alexander, no mention of the letter, only a title, The Futuro Dois Nite Forget. Because in the world Julia rebuilt, silence was no longer a cage. It was a beginning. And now, you know the story they tried to bury. A boy erased by power, a man forged in silence, a legacy rewritten, not with vengeance, but with precision. But, this isn't just about one family, one empire, or one letter turned to ash. This is about what happens when the forgotten rise, when pain becomes purpose, when silence becomes voice. Some inherit wealth, others inherit wounds, but the most dangerous legacy is the one built by those who were never meant to survive. Tell us, if you were Julia, would you have forgiven? Or would you have let the fire consume every name that once left you behind? We want to hear you. Drop your truth in the comments. Let the world know if you believe redemption is owned or burned. If the story shook something in you, shed it. Because in this world of shadows in glass towers, sometimes the loudest echo comes from the ones they tried to silence. This is $1 Billion Curve, where wealth hides pain, and revenge has its price.